All right. Well, good morning, everybody. If you're joining us, welcome. If you're watching this live, we'll have opportunity to do a chat today for questions. And if you're watching this recorded later, well, welcome nonetheless. And feel free to send us your questions. We're going to hang out just for a few seconds here, let people get started and join in. We'll be getting started in just a second here. All right. Well, as people join and get settled in, because this is a live event, they'll be able to jump forward in this. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So good morning, everybody. The meeting today is the pros and cons of using Apple computers for business. So today we're going to talk to you. We're going to quick introduce ourselves. We're going to tell you kind of the market share of who we see using Apple computers in businesses, the pros and cons of it. And at the end, we're going to give a door prize for those who pre-registered for this event. We'll do a Amazon gift card drawing for that. So first of all, I am David Steenwijk. I'm joined today by Jared Navarre. Good morning, Jared. How you doing?
Morning, Dave. Doing great. How are you?
Doing well, thanks. So this is kind of fun. Microsoft Teams live event here. Today we're talking about using Apple products in the workplace. So of everybody in our office, Jared, you and I are the two who are probably the biggest Mac users. So we are the ones who volunteered to talk today about the pros and cons of it. So real quick, I'll just tell for myself here. So I started using Apple computers when I was a kid. My first computers were, more like text-based and DOS and things like that. But I remember when I was in middle school, we got a Power Mac computer, and it was awesome. It played games and had cool graphics, and you could play CDs in it. It was awesome. And so I've used Apple computers and Windows computers through the years. How do you get started with Apple?
I have a similar background, Dave. I think when I was a young boy, Macs were pretty prevalent in schools. So I started using the first computer I actually used was an Apple II GS. And I recall playing Oregon Trail on it, if anyone remembers that game. Kind of a public domain game. You can actually get it for free now if you want some nostalgia. But as I got older and got into the workforce, my first job was actually at a newspaper. And prior to Mac Tech, I worked in the publishing industry for about a decade. And Macs are the primary computer we use in the publishing industry due to applications being supported on Mac primarily and graphic design as well. So that's my background.
So personally at home, do you have a preference one or the other, or is it sort of an example that the cobbler's children go barefoot and you don't even have computers at home, or what do you?
Well, I do have a Mac at home, and I do like to use it. I feel like it's a bit of a shift from work. At work, I'm using Windows most of the day. There's a few clients we have that we do support Mac, but for the most part, we support Windows. So it's kind of nice to mix it up a little bit. And I do find that it's kind of a home mindset versus a work mindset for me. I don't feel like I'm at work when I get home, I suppose, is the reason for that.
Nice. So yeah, at home, I actually have mostly I do mobile devices like iPad and things like that, but still use a Mac for video editing and other things. So I would say that for today's presentation, so Jared and I are both pro both Windows and Apple, and I would say that we probably look at the situation more to help our clients decide what they should or shouldn't use, or how they should sort of manage their devices. So with that being said, so who currently uses Apple computers, Jared?
Well, as I previously mentioned, the publishing industry, Apple is still a big player. Adobe software in particular often launches first on the Mac OS platform. In recent years, that's been shifting a little bit as the PCs have taken more market share, I think, even in the publishing industry, as Adobe has supported the Windows OS a lot better. And as I mentioned before, in the school environments, Apple would often give an education discount to school districts. And that discount would also apply to individuals who work for the school. So, for instance, my mom works at a elementary school, and she could take advantage of a couple $100 discount on an Apple PC. In recent years, their market share has fallen due to the prevalence of Chromebooks, a very cheap device that can be deployed to students. I think part of the reason is the cost and easy manageability of those devices.
Yeah, so originally, right, like teachers, like education and sort of graphic design and people who were into video editing and things like that, like those were like two of the big markets originally, right? I mean, that's where, I mean, again, we grew up in schools, and the schools got a lot of discounts, and that's how they were able to get a lot of Apple computers. So that traditionally has been a bigger one. I also thought this was kind of interesting one to note here. Business leaders. We see a ton of our clients where either the main point of contact or the business owner or the president of the company uses an Apple computer. It's kind of funny preference, I guess, if anything, because it isn't so much that the job requires it or it's necessary for it. I think it's more of a preference. At least that's my observation.
Yeah, I agree, but I also think that oftentimes the role of a CEO or a big picture leader doesn't require all of the applications. Let's say someone in accounting would need, or someone in a role that has higher requirements for line of business software. So they can usually get by with an email client and a web browser, for instance. So
yeah,
that becomes less important what platform they're on as to what they're comfortable with, I suppose.
And the last one on our list there, developers.
Yes, web development in particular, I see a lot personally from my experience. I have friends that work in the development world, and they use Mac OS pretty heavily in that sector. Now, I do know that also better tool sets have become available for Windows, including Visual Studio Code, which is actually also available on Mac now. So the lines have become blurred a little bit in the development world. But Xcode is still a big platform for iOS development, including iPads and iPhones, as well as the Apple Watch. So you're going to want a Mac if you develop for those platforms.
Yeah, currently Apple has around 9.5% of the market share. So it has grown through the years. I remember there was a period of time when it was only in the 2 to 3% range. So it has definitely grown through the years, but it is still pretty small in terms of the overall percentage of the market. So why would those industries use, we touched on a little bit on some of those points here, but why would those industries use Apple computers?
Sure. So the native industry software is a big one. Productivity suites like Quark Express one's been particularly superseded by Adobe InDesign, but that's a big one in the publishing world. Those two pieces of software. Now, another one is design software. So the full Adobe suite is often the development is often with Mac in mind. So when you use those applications side by side on a Windows machine and a Mac, you might notice a smoother experience on the Mac side. I did mention the discounts in the education sector. Those are still prevalent and they still exist. But as I said, for student use, we're seeing more Chromebooks now. My suspicion is because the school, it's a better investment to buy a student something that's $200. Let's say they throw it in their backpack, it gets beat up, it gets broken. They're not out $1,200, $1,500 on a Apple laptop. So, and I know this is one that you mentioned when we last spoke about the CEOs and business leaders, the appearance of the hardware. So they're a little spiffier looking. They have a sheen to them. They spend more time on the design aspect than, say, a Dell. You're going to have
Although I will say that Dell has come a long ways. There used to be, back in the day, there was a stark difference between the two, and at least Dell has made some progress there. But generally speaking, yes, the Apple products definitely look nicer. They have a premium price, of course, but they definitely, I like that word, spiffy.
Yeah, it's not the case that you're going to go out and buy a beige box anymore for a PC. I know that Apple kind of leaned on that heavily in their marketing campaign. It was about a decade back when they had the "I'm a Mac, I'm a PC" ads. They kind of were positioning the PC to look kind of frumpy and old school.
Sure.
I think the hardware manufacturers have come a long way in design and industrial design as well, and especially the portable devices. So
one thing to note here too on this slide is that a lot of the applications are cross-platform, right? So one of the things I would note here is that a lot of habits formed, right, and then they developed, and it's hard to change, right? So maybe you started using an Apple computer 20 years ago for your job because the software was just better for it or it's limited to it. Nowadays, those, like you said, the lines have blurred. It's not as big of a difference, but people got used to it. And I think that's one of the reasons too, is that, they've kind of always used that.
Sure. And touching on the development world again, Mac OS 10, when that was released at the turn of the century, it's been a little while. It's almost been 20 years, I think, since that's came out.
When I think turn of the century, I think 1900, not 2000.
Well, I know.
I guess I'm getting old.
It happens. I feel the same. But as the case may be, Mac OS 10 was a big paradigm shift for Apple. Their previous OS 9, was kind of long in tooth, and I think that was during the period where you mentioned their market share was quite low, and Mac OS 10 was quite a hit. And part of that reason was it was based on a Unix system. You may have heard of Linux, or in the business world, especially in the server industry, that's more prevalent. You don't see it so much for end user desktops, but the advantage with a Unix system in this case is that developer friendly environment. You can pop open an application called Terminal that comes shipped with every Mac, and you can start developing right from there. You don't need any other tools. So that's a big bonus. Now Windows is caught up a little bit with PowerShell. You can open a PowerShell window up and start developing from there. And that's only been in the last 12, 13 years. So they're also catching up in that sector, but that's a big reason popularity.
So the pros, why would people use Apple products? I think the first one here, this was a huge one. This has been a huge one for a long time, right? Apple makes both the hardware and the software. Whereas if you buy a Dell or an HP computer, they only make the hardware, and then Microsoft makes the software. And having that really tight integration, knowing that they're controlling it from the beginning to end, has traditionally made it a better experience. I remember back in my younger days of IT, we had issues with drivers and different things. I know we still have to worry about that, but it's less of an issue now. But that's always been a big one. That tighter integrated experience. The second one, Jared, this is one that people point to all the time, right? Viruses and malware.
It's a big one. So Microsoft Windows has the biggest installed base of any desktop operating system, and that means it's the biggest target. There's loads of malware and viruses in the Windows ecosystem, and part of that reason is because Windows supports applications that are 25 years old. And that kind of ubiquity of ability to run software leads you to be a bigger target. So you have to be more vigilant. You have to be more cautious and invest in some antivirus software, as well as keep your machine up to date. It's much more important on the Windows side to have those timely updates to prevent yourself from being a target.
So. Go ahead, Jerry.
Oh, I was just going to say, there are viruses and malware for Mac, but there's probably 1 or 2 for every 10 on the Windows side. So,
yeah, I was going to say, a lot of times people have said you can't get viruses or malware on an Apple computer. And that's not necessarily true, but certainly the Windows world, it's like you said, the main reason it's a bigger target. If Apple has somewhere around 9.5% market share, why would you go after that when 87% of the computers out there run Windows? It's the amount of work it takes and everything. You'd rather have that larger target base. So traditionally, this has been a big reason for it as well. Now, I've always contended that if the tables were turned and Mac was 90%, I think we would see a lot more problems with it. But until that happens, this is the way it is. This next one is an interesting one. A lot of people in the business world have used an iPhone, right? The iPhone's been around for over a decade now. And before that, we either had flip phones or we had these like the Trio smartphones or Blackberries, things like that. And so Apple's really weren't in the business world. And suddenly we had people buying iPads and iPhones, and it was nice, but it was really sort of a peripheral device that was, outside of your computer. These last couple rounds, as Apple has gone along with their revisions to their operating system, the integration between your Apple computer and your iPhone or iPad or whatever, like it's pretty slick. Like it's like the two roads that were far apart are getting closer and closer all the time. Even with the most recent releases, they changed the way things look again. So I think that's another reason, people have started using some of these other devices, and now they see how it's becoming so similar on what could be on their computer. I think that's been another reason why more people have adopted Apple products at work.
I agree. And in addition to that note, I think that Microsoft has tried to make entrance into the smartphone world with limited success. It just doesn't seem like there's enough elbow room right now with Android and iPhone for them to make a dent. And unfortunately, the integration between a Windows machine and an Android phone is kind of lacking. There's always complications. Let's say you want to transfer pictures. You plug it into your computer. You have to download another application. You have to make sure you have the driver. Whereas with an iPhone, it's all synced wirelessly. The iCloud environment seamlessly syncs on both Mac OS desktop as well as iOS. So it's just a better experience. It feels like an extension of the laptop rather than an entirely separate device. I think the messaging is a big one. I know that you use this iMessage on your iPhone and iMessage on your Mac laptop. It's kind of handy. You can type messages much quicker on a full keyboard.
So Steve Jobs has passed on many years ago now, but Steve Jobs was huge about the look and feel of things. If you ever get a chance, I don't know if you've read it, but anybody watching or listening to this, I highly recommend his biography. Talks in there about where his inspiration came about the way that things look and feel. And so he was big into design and things like that. So in my opinion, a lot of people's opinion, the interface, the way things look, the graphics, et cetera, on Apple products has always been better than Windows. Bill Gates was more of an engineer-minded, and that's not to say that that's wrong, but that is a personal preference. So that's one more reason that people have chosen those products. This is another big one too, that I have a theory on why this is, Jared, but there's a perception that people say, well, Apple computers, it just works. Mm-hmm. My theory on that now, Apple has moved away from this in the last 5 years, but back in the day when their market share was 2 to 3%, their ads used to show you how to use their products, and they would actually show you like how to swipe side to side to unlock the phone, and they would show you different things inside these applications. And so my theory is that you'd watch it 2, 3, 5, 20 times on TV. And then you'd see the computer. Well, they basically trained you on how to use it. So you'd walk up to it and you'd say, oh, this is so intuitive. I'm not sure. I mean, I think if Microsoft had shown you how to do everything on their computer, you would also know how to use that and feel like it just works. Now, with that being said, I do believe that often it does just work better because they control the hardware, software end to end.
In addition to that, Apple has the advantage of a physical storefront, and they've leveraged that. I know the last time I brought my iPhone in, I had an issue with a screen and brought it in. They had a training session for youngsters that was how to code. Now, they were obviously it was a very simple visual representation of how programming works, but they had a workshop and were bringing kids in to educate them on that process. So I thought that was pretty cool. Whereas Microsoft doesn't have that physical storefront where they can do something like that. So
another one here, why do some people want to use it? I think that there's often the users who use Apple products at work are more more tech savvy. Typically, especially if they've been more the graphic designers or programmers, things like that.
Sure.
A lot of times people who really don't a computer is just a part of their job. They don't have a preference of Windows or Apple. And this one is an interesting one. So I actually do this for work. I actually use an Apple computer. I've done that for the last 10 years or so at work, not just personally. But I can't do everything I need to in Apple's operating system natively. So I have to virtualize Windows, and that's pretty slick. Now you can virtualize other operating systems as well. But I run a program called Parallels. It allows me to live in both worlds. For me personally, as a techie guy, like I like both, right? I like to tinker. Maybe I don't have quite as much time as I used to. I've got other priorities. Life's moved along here, but that's been a big one too. You can virtualize that. One thing to note, with the new Apple products with the M1 chip recently, that has been limited. As of, I think, last week, now Parallels does allow you to virtualize with the new M1 chip. So if you were holding out to upgrade because of that, I haven't tested it, but if they're releasing the software, I would hope that it's good to go.
Right. I think time will prove that out, but I do know that the Windows ARM version is supported. Now, what that means is it's a different type of processor, so you do have to check and make sure your line of business applications support that as well. But if they do, then you're good to go. So,
yep. Any other pros, Jared, that we didn't put on here that come to mind on why you would want to use an Apple product?
I would say longevity of support. I have a 10-year-old MacBook Pro that just went out of support. I mean, within the last few months, and it's still a solid machine. I've used it for a full decade. It's gotten updates all along the way. You probably can't say the same for a PC that you bought in 2011 or 2012. They do support their hardware for quite a while.
Yep. Good. So the cons, right? Why do people not use Apple products in the workplace? While those computers can last a while, Apple doesn't want you to upgrade. So, I found it interesting. Apple, I mean, in the early days, Steve Jobs, he didn't even want you to be able to open your computer. I mean, they would make it where you had to have special tools, and we've kind of gone back to that now. But generally speaking, they don't want you tinkering around with it. Once you buy it, I mean, it's just sort of like they want it to be left closed.
Right. Everything is sealed on the portable machines. There have been some give and take with the desktop machines, including the Mac Mini and the iMac, where even we could probably service some things on them. But the laptops generally are pretty glued together and pretty well integrated to where it's basically impossible to add any new hardware to them. So
yeah. Software compatibility, again, this one is less of an issue, but it is still very much something to consider. For instance, if you run QuickBooks at the office and you're doing an on-premise versus the cloud, you have to virtualize, or you have to go connect into like a virtual desktop somewhere to be able to run that. So not all software is compatible between Windows and Apple products. That's one of the big ones, right? I think that's there are ways to work around it, but that's still an issue.
Right. You have to be able to get your job done, and if the application is not supported, it's just not going to work for you. So, I guess moving on to the next topic, this is where we run into trouble sometimes. For support reasons, Apple has made it a little difficult to install traditional monitoring and maintenance software in the last couple of versions. Now, while it still works, it's a little clunkier than it is on the Windows side. Apple has been moving to a model of mobile device management. So for iPhones and iPads, this has existed for a number of years, but the ability to manage those devices in bulk does exist. There's not always a great solution for smaller organizations. If we were an institution like a university, that we'd have easier access to that sort of software. But since we aren't huge, it's a little difficult to get into that world.
Yeah, so we've helped our clients manage their what we call endpoints, so their computers for a while now. And generally, the software that we use and the software that is made for our industry to do that, it works really well, or it's awesome for Windows. And the Mac support for it is average at best, and often it's below average. Being honest, right? Like it's just like it's always an afterthought. It's sort of well, you get what to pay for, so you have to end up finding something else, a whole other system to support those devices. And if it's only, 9% of the market share, it's hard to justify that. And it's hard to really manage those devices. So it's sort of adding exceptions to the rule in the business world. It adds a certain level of complexity, I guess I would say.
Right.
So yeah, management software. And jumping back one, Jared, to support, right, technicians. This one's a challenge. So for me, when I was a tech, I liked supporting Apples. I enjoy it, but it is definitely different. And we found that a lot of techs just aren't as good at it. They're not as interested in it, not just here at Macatawa, but across our industry. Certainly, there are people who specialize in it. But generally speaking, it is harder to find technicians who are as proficient in supporting Apple devices as it is with Windows.
Right. And part of that's market share. Part of that is just, I think, the technical world, the engineering world often favors Windows writ large. So whereas maybe developers use Mac as a platform, a lot of the industry-specific software is more Windows-oriented on the technical side or on the engineering side. So that's a challenge. And then the next, maybe the biggest one for a lot of folks is the price tag. When you go and price an equivalent Apple laptop versus an HP or a Dell, you're going to pay a premium for an Apple machine. And there's no doubt about that, even with a discount. Even let's say you are working in education, you get a couple $100 off. Okay, that brings it from $1,500 to $1,300. Whereas a entry-level PC can be had for $600-700 comparison.
Yeah. One last point, Jared, to the support on technicians. I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg in this situation, but I have noticed that there is a bit of animosity when it comes to Apple computers. And I don't know where that originated, but as an example, I hated those ads that were like, I'm a Mac and I'm a PC. Like, I like both. And it's like they sort of pitted one against the other. And I think that turned off a lot of IT professionals are like, hey, why are you making fun of me if I'm an engineer or I'm a business guy? Like, I think that it probably helped them gain some market share. But generally, I think I hated those ads with a passion because I like both. And
kind of clicky. Yeah.
I hated that. So, but this is a big one, right? This is probably this last point that we have, the consumer versus business orientation. So Apple has always developed products with the consumer first in mind. Businesses and organizations, they've been secondary, right? And when you look at the whole market for computers, consumers, it was always a bigger, share. So Apple has always done that. Now, with that being said, have they worked and catered to education and businesses? Absolutely, yes. However, it adds a layer of complexity, often unnecessary complexity, when it comes to support for us. And again, I'm saying that as somebody who's used an Apple computer in the business world for at least a decade now. It's not made for business, right? I mean, yes, they would totally challenge me on that and say, no, it is, and here's why. I'm telling you, that's not the case. It's an afterthought. It frankly is an afterthought. So everything from Active Directory and support and the software and everything else. And I think that's kind of the last point I would make here is often we didn't put this question on here, but should you use it in a business environment? I think that's up to each organization. I think there are reasons of the pros and cons we went through. I think everybody needs to answer that individually. Again, I've done it because we have clients that do it. And frankly, I like Apple products. but go in knowing that it does add a certain layer of complexity that's not always needed. A lot of times we'll have clients who want to use it, and it's like, well, why? Well, that's what I've always had. Okay, that's fine. We're happy to accommodate that, and we will, we'll do a good job supporting it.
Right.
But just know that Apple's mentality from Steve Jobs has always been that it's the consumer first and businesses and organizations second.
Yes, they can coexist, but it will take extra work to make them play nicely, so to speak. And we're more than happy to make that happen. But we're also going to give you an unbiased opinion when you ask us, should we use a Mac? We're going to consider those factors in your environment, whether it be line of business software, cost, and as well as interoperability with your existing workstations. So feel free to ask if you're curious.
If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. If you have suggestions for future topics, let us know. One of them that I mentioned to Jared before we started was we could do a Teams Live event on how to do a Teams Live event. There are a number of things to consider as you work behind the scenes and just sort of how this all works. So anyway, thanks again, Jared. Thanks for chatting today.
Thanks, Dave.
Have a great week.
Take care.